Marcus lived in a small quiet town where stories of the past often lived longer than the people themselves. At the center of one of those stories stood his house. The house was more than just a building with walls and windows. It was a landmark of history, standing tall for over 150 years. The house carried memories of generations and was a living reminder of the strength and perseverance of his family. Marcus's great-great-grandfather had built it with his own hands long ago. He was a man who worked hard with the limited tools he had. Every beam, every wooden step, and every nail told a story of determination. The house had survived storms, floods, and even times when the town had almost forgotten about it. Yet it remained strong, and the people who lived there continued to honor it. Marcus grew up listening to the stories his grandfather told him on the wide porch of that house. His grandfather would sit on a wooden rocking chair and say, "This house is more than shelter. It is proof that we can endure anything. Never let anyone take it from you." Those words became a promise in Marcus's heart. The town had changed a lot over the years. New buildings, stores, and shiny houses appeared around the neighborhood. Roads were paved, and modern designs began to replace the charm of the old streets. But Marcus's house stood firm, with its large oak beams and brick chimney. Many people admired it when they passed by, calling it a piece of art from another era. Children would sometimes stop and stare, asking their parents how a house could be so old and still so beautiful. Marcus himself was proud of the house. He worked hard to keep it in good shape. On weekends, he would fix small things like the paint on the porch railing or the hinges on the old doors. The walls carried the smell of polished wood, and the floors creaked softly under every step. For Marcus, these small details were not problems. They were reminders of the many feet that had walked there before him. The house was also filled with memories. Family gatherings during holidays, birthdays celebrated in the living room, and laughter that echoed through the walls made the house feel alive. Marcus often thought about his ancestors. He imagined them walking through the same halls, sitting at the same dining table, and watching the same sunsets through the tall windows. It made him feel connected to them, even though they were long gone. For Marcus, the house was not only history but also a source of comfort. When life became difficult, he could sit on the porch in the evening and feel a sense of peace. The gentle breeze that passed through the oak trees surrounding the yard seemed to tell him that everything would be all right. The land was wide and open, giving space for gardens and fruit trees that had been planted many years ago. Neighbors often admired the sweet smell of flowers that came from his yard in the spring. However, not everyone in the town appreciated the old house. In recent years, new people had moved into the neighborhood. They wanted everything to look modern and stylish. To them, Marcus's house looked out of place among the freshly painted houses with shiny fences and identical designs. They saw the old structure as a problem rather than a treasure. But Marcus never let their opinions bother him. He believed in the value of history. He knew that while new houses could be built every year, none of them carried the soul of the past like his did. The house was a storybook, and every corner had something to tell. The land the house stood on was also valuable. It was larger than most other properties in the neighborhood. The backyard stretched far, with tall oak trees that had been there even before the house was built. It gave Marcus space for gardens, a small workshop, and even a wooden shed that his father had built. For developers, this land was a dream spot, but for Marcus, it was sacred ground. The townspeople often came to Marcus whenever they needed to learn about the history of the community. His house was seen as one of the oldest living proofs of the town's beginnings. Teachers sometimes brought school children to show them what life used to be like. Photographers loved capturing the rustic beauty of the porch and the sunlight shining through the old windows. Despite all this, Marcus lived a simple life. He worked a steady job, spent time in his garden, and cared for his house. He was quiet but deeply respected by those who valued honesty and history. He never showed off and never asked for more than what he had. His joy came from knowing he was preserving something that could never be replaced. As the sun set each evening, Marcus would sit outside and watch the golden light fall on the wooden walls of his home. The glow made the house look alive, almost as if it was smiling back at him. He felt proud, but also aware that not everyone understood why he held onto it so dearly. What Marcus did not know was that soon his love for the house would be tested. While he believed he was only protecting family history, others saw it as an opportunity for profit. Hidden discussions were already happening behind closed doors. Certain people in the neighborhood were beginning to plan ways to take what was not theirs. But on that quiet evening, Marcus had no idea of the challenges ahead. All he knew was that he had a duty to honor the promise his grandfather once made him repeat, to never let anyone take the house away. Marcus woke up early one morning to the sound of the mail truck stopping at the end of his driveway. The air was crisp, and sunlight poured gently across the yard. He walked down the path to collect the envelopes, expecting the usual bills, letters, and maybe a flyer or two. But tucked among them was a thick white envelope with a bold stamp on the corner. It was from the Homeowners Association, a group Marcus rarely heard from and never had much to do with. Curious, he opened the letter while still standing by the gate. His eyes moved across the paper, and a small frown appeared on his face. The letter claimed that his house did not follow the standards of the neighborhood. It mentioned paint colors, fencing styles, and landscaping that supposedly did not match the rest of the area. It ended with a warning that he might need to pay a fine. Marcus shook his head slowly. He knew his house was different, but it was different in a way that mattered. It was historic, meaningful, and had stood long before the association even existed. He folded the letter and walked back inside, deciding not to worry about it. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus thought the matter had passed. He continued his daily routine of tending to his garden, repairing the wooden porch, and enjoying the peace of his evenings. But then another letter came. This one was sharper in tone. It stated that Marcus owed several $100s in maintenance fees and that his house still violated neighborhood rules. If he did not pay soon, further action would be taken. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and read the letter twice. He had never agreed to be part of such rules. His house stood on land that had belonged to his family for over a century. The Homeowners Association was much newer, formed by neighbors who wanted a more modern look for the community. He had no memory of signing any paper that gave them power over his property. Still, the words in the letter made him uneasy. He decided to walk over to the small office where the HOA board held their meetings. It was a neat building with clean glass windows and a sign that read Community Center. Inside, a few people sat behind desks. They looked up when Marcus entered. "Can I help you?" one of them asked with a polite but firm smile. "Yes," Marcus replied calmly. "I received this letter. I think there has been a mistake. My property is historic, and I don't believe your rules apply to it." The woman behind the desk glanced at the letter, then at Marcus. "We enforce community standards for everyone," she said. "Your house is not in compliance, and fees must be paid." Marcus stood tall and replied, "My house has been here for 150 years. It was here before this association existed. It is recognized as part of this town's history. I will not pay for rules that were never made for my property." The room fell silent for a moment. The woman cleared her throat and said, "We will review your case, but be prepared. The board is strict about following standards." Marcus left the office feeling uneasy but determined. He believed truth would protect him. He returned to his home, sat on the porch, and reminded himself of the promise he had made to his grandfather. The house was not only his shelter. It was his responsibility to guard it against unfair hands. Weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one was heavier, stamped in bold letters at the top, "Notice of Lien." Marcus unfolded the paper slowly, his eyes narrowing as he read. The HOA claimed he now owed thousands of dollars in unpaid fees. If he did not pay, they could place a lien on his house. That meant they could hold legal claim over his property, making it impossible for him to sell or borrow against it. Marcus set the paper down on the table. For the first time, he felt a wave of anger rising inside him. Not because of the money, but because of the disrespect. His family had worked tirelessly to keep the house alive. Generations had cared for it with pride. And now, a group of neighbors who had only recently moved into the area believed they could take it away with paperwork. He walked through the rooms of his house that night, touching the wooden walls and looking at old photographs on the shelves. His ancestors smiled back at him from faded pictures. He whispered quietly, "I will not let them take this place from us." The next morning, Marcus began to gather documents. He searched through old boxes stored in the attic. There he found yellowed deeds, tax receipts, and letters that stretched back through time. His great-grandfather had saved every important paper, knowing one day they might be needed. Marcus carefully placed them in a folder. Meanwhile, the HOA board continued to meet in secret. Some members were eager to push Marcus out. They had noticed that his property sat on the largest lot in the neighborhood. If the house were gone, they could sell the land to developers for new luxury homes. To them, it was a perfect opportunity to make money. They convinced themselves that Marcus's house was nothing more than an old structure standing in the way of progress. But Marcus was not aware of the full extent of their plan yet. All he knew was that letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. Some neighbors even began whispering, saying Marcus should just sell and move somewhere else. Yet, whenever he heard such talk, Marcus stood firm. He explained that the house was not for sale, not at any price. On one particular evening, Marcus sat on his porch while the sun set behind the trees. A friend from town stopped by. She was a teacher who often brought her students to see the historic home. She noticed Marcus looked troubled and asked what was wrong. Marcus explained the letters, the fees, and the threats. Her eyes widened with concern. "Marcus, they cannot do this. Your house is part of our history. You need to fight back." Her words encouraged him. He realized he was not alone. Many in the town respected his house and understood its importance. They would stand with him if needed. That night, Marcus promised himself he would not be intimidated by unfair tactics. He would face whatever came next with courage. The struggle had only begun, but Marcus knew one thing for certain. The old house was more than wood and nails. It was the heart of his family, and he would protect it no matter what it took. Marcus had faced many challenges in his life, but the situation with the Homeowners Association was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The letters did not stop. Each week, a new envelope arrived with sharper language, higher fees, and fresh threats. Marcus stayed calm on the outside, but inside, he could feel the pressure building. He knew the board was serious about trying to push him out. One evening, Marcus sat at his dining table with the old documents spread out before him. He flipped through yellow deeds, tax records, and letters passed down by his family. The papers told a story of strength and survival. Each generation had managed to hold onto the property through hard times, and Marcus would not be the one to lose it. He gathered the most important records into a binder. His plan was simple. If the HOA wanted to challenge him, he would be ready with proof that the land and house belonged to his family and always would. As he prepared, whispers from the neighborhood began to reach him. A kind neighbor told him quietly that the HOA was discussing his property in their meetings more often than usual. Another friend mentioned that certain board members had spoken with real estate developers. It became clear to Marcus that the problem was not about paint colors or fences. It was about land. His property was the largest in the area, and the board wanted it. The thought of it made Marcus pause. He looked out at his yard, the wide open space with tall oak trees that had stood for centuries. The garden his mother once planted still bloomed in the spring. The porch where his grandfather used to sit in the evenings still carried the echo of old stories. Developers might see only profit, but to Marcus, every inch of that ground was sacred. The HOA board's plan became clearer when Marcus received another notice. This time, it did not just threaten a lien. It announced a board hearing to decide on further action against him. Marcus read the letter slowly, his jaw tightening. It was no longer about small fines. They were moving to take real steps toward controlling his property. That night, Marcus could not sleep. He walked through the rooms of the house, the wooden floor creaking under his steps. He stopped in front of the old photographs of his ancestors hanging on the wall. Their faces reminded him of the promise he carried in his heart. He whispered, "I will not let them take this away." The following week, Marcus decided to attend the board meeting. He walked into the community center with his binder of documents tucked under his arm. The room was filled with board members sitting at a long table. A few other residents had come to watch. Marcus took a seat, waiting patiently. The chairperson of the board cleared his throat and began. "We are here to discuss the repeated violations at Mr. Marcus's property. Despite notices, he has failed to comply with the standards of the neighborhood." Marcus raised his hand calmly. "I would like to respond," he said. The chairperson nodded. Marcus stood and placed his binder on the table. He spoke clearly and firmly. "This property has belonged to my family for 150 years. It is recognized as part of the history of this town. These documents prove ownership that predates the very existence of this association. You have no authority to place fees or liens on my home." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided his gaze. One member spoke sharply, "All properties in this community must follow the same rules. If we make exceptions, it undermines the association." Marcus replied, "Rules cannot erase history. You may make guidelines for new houses, but you cannot rewrite the past. This house is not only mine. It is part of the identity of this town." The room grew quiet. Some residents who had come to watch began nodding in agreement. They respected Marcus and knew his words were true. But the board members seemed unmoved. The chairperson ended the meeting by saying the board would review the matter further. Marcus left the community center with a heavy heart. He could feel the determination of the board. They would not give up easily. Yet, he also felt stronger after speaking out. He had shown them he would not be silent. In the days that followed, Marcus learned more about the board's plan. A neighbor who worked at the town office quietly told him that the HOA had already been in contact with developers. They had discussed building new luxury homes on large lots. Marcus's land was the biggest and most valuable, and they were eager to get it. It all made sense now. The letters, the fines, the lien threats, they were tools in a larger plan to force him out. The board wanted his land, not because of rules, but because of greed. Instead of feeling afraid, Marcus felt a spark of determination. He began preparing for a bigger fight. He visited the town's historical society and asked for official records of his home's heritage status. The historians gladly helped him, providing letters and certificates that recognized the property as one of the oldest in the county. Marcus also spoke with friends in the community. Many of them stood with him, offering support and encouragement. Teachers reminded him of how often they brought students to learn about the house. Local families told him they valued the history his home represented. The more he listened, the more Marcus realized he was not only defending his family's legacy but also preserving a treasure for the entire town. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch, he looked at the horizon and thought about the path ahead. The HOA believed they could pressure him into giving up. But Marcus was not a man who gave up. He was a man who carried the strength of generations. The board's plan had been revealed, and now Marcus had his own plan. He would gather every piece of evidence, every letter, every record, and he would take them to a place where truth mattered: the courtroom. The house stood behind him, glowing softly in the evening light. It had survived storms, floods, and years of change. Now it faced a new kind of storm, but Marcus believed it would stand just as strong. He placed his hand on the wooden railing of the porch and said quietly, "We are ready." The day finally came when Marcus stood face to face with the Homeowners Association in court. The battle that had begun with simple letters in his mailbox had grown into a full legal fight. Marcus knew the HOA wanted him gone, but he also knew he had truth and history on his side. He arrived at the courthouse early, carrying the same binder he had carefully filled with deeds, tax receipts, letters, and certificates. His steps were steady as he climbed the courthouse stairs. To him, this was not only about a house. It was about respect for his family and protection of a legacy that had survived for over 150 years. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. On one side of the room sat Marcus, calm and firm, with his binder resting on the table. On the other side sat the HOA board, dressed neatly and speaking in low whispers to their lawyer. Some board members avoided Marcus's gaze, but others stared at him with cold determination. The judge entered, and everyone stood. After the opening formalities, the judge turned to the HOA lawyer. "You may present your case," the judge said. The lawyer stood, holding a stack of papers. His voice was confident. "Your Honor, the Homeowners Association has rules that apply to all properties within the neighborhood. Mr. Marcus has failed to follow these rules. He has refused to pay the required fees, and he has ignored notices sent to him. Therefore, the association has placed a lien on his property to recover the money owed." The lawyer paused before continuing. "It is important that every homeowner follow the same standards. Exceptions weaken the authority of the association. If Mr. Marcus is allowed to ignore the rules, then others will follow. Order must be maintained." The judge nodded slightly and turned to Marcus. "Mr. Marcus, you may respond." Marcus stood slowly, opened his binder, and spoke in a calm but steady voice. "Your Honor, my family's house was built more than 150 years ago. It has stood on this land long before the Homeowners Association was ever formed. This property was passed down through generations, and I have documents that prove it. The association cannot claim authority over a home that existed before its rules were created." He lifted a deed and held it up for the court. This is the original ownership paper from the time my great-great-grandfather built the house. Here are tax receipts showing continuous payment for over a century. And here are letters from the town's historical society recognizing my home as part of the community's heritage. Marcus placed the documents on the judge's desk. Your Honor, this is not about paint colors or fences. The association is trying to take what does not belong to them. They are using false fines and liens to force me out, not because I broke rules, but because they want my land. The courtroom fell silent. The judge leaned forward, carefully examining the papers. The weight of history seemed to rest on the pages. The HOA lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat before speaking again. Your Honor, the lawyer said, the association is only following its rules. Mr. Marcus may have historic property, but rules must apply equally. Allowing him to ignore them sets a dangerous precedent. Marcus responded firmly, rules cannot erase history. You cannot make me part of an agreement I never signed. My family never gave permission for this board to control our land. To apply rules to a property that predates the association is not law. It is overreach. The judge raised a hand, signaling for quiet. I have heard enough for now, the judge said. This case is about more than simple fees. It is about authority and history. I will take time to review the evidence. During the short recess, Marcus sat quietly, his hands resting on the binder. He thought about his grandfather's words and felt a sense of calm. He had spoken truth, and truth gave him strength. Meanwhile, the HOA members huddled with their lawyer, their faces tense. The confidence they had shown earlier seemed to fade. When the judge returned, the room grew still. The judge's voice was steady as he began to speak. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that Mr. Marcus's property has historic significance. The documents show that his family has owned and maintained the land long before the Homeowners Association was formed. The board cannot enforce rules on property that predates its existence. Furthermore, the attempt to place a lien appears unjustified and unsupported by law. The judge looked directly at the HOA members. This court orders the lien to be removed immediately. The Homeowners Association is instructed to cease all attempts to claim authority over Mr. Marcus's property. Additionally, due to the unnecessary distress caused, the association will be responsible for paying damages to Mr. Marcus. Gasps filled the courtroom. Some residents who had attended to watch nodded with approval. The HOA members sat in silence, their faces pale with shock. Their plan to take the land had collapsed before their eyes. Marcus remained calm. He simply bowed his head slightly and said, "Thank you, Your Honor." As the court session ended, people approached Marcus to shake his hand. They praised his courage and thanked him for standing firm. One teacher said, "You did not just protect your home. You protected a piece of history for all of us." Marcus smiled humbly and replied, "This house belongs to my family, but its story belongs to the town." Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood for a moment in the sunlight. The battle had been difficult, but justice had spoken. He knew the HOA members would regret their actions, not only because they had lost the case but because they had lost the trust of the community. That evening, Marcus returned home and sat on his porch. The house glowed warmly in the setting sun, as if it had been waiting for him. He placed his hand on the wooden railing, feeling the smooth texture worn by generations. He whispered quietly, "We did it." The old house stood tall and proud, a symbol of endurance. Marcus knew the fight was not only about saving his property but also about proving that history cannot be erased by greed. The court had confirmed what he always believed: the house was not just a building. It was a legacy that would continue to stand, safe and strong. After the courtroom battle was over, Marcus walked back into his home with a sense of peace he had not felt for many weeks. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders was finally gone. The lien was erased, the false claims were dismissed, and the truth had been spoken clearly in front of everyone. His family's house, which had stood for more than 150 years, was safe once again. News of the court ruling spread quickly through the town. People admired Marcus for his courage and his calm strength. They respected the way he had stood up not only for himself but also for the history of the community. Neighbors came to visit, bringing small gifts of food, flowers, and even handwritten notes of congratulations. Some of them told Marcus that they felt proud to live in a town with a man who valued history so deeply. Children who had often stopped to stare at the old house now pointed at it with excitement, saying to their parents, "That is the house that won in court." Teachers spoke about the case in classrooms, reminding their students that history must be protected, not erased. For many people, the house no longer looked like just an old building. It now stood as a powerful symbol of justice and resilience. The members of the HOA board, however, felt the heavy weight of regret. They had walked into court believing they could bend the law to their will, but they had left in silence, defeated and embarrassed. Their neighbors no longer trusted them. Residents who once supported the board now questioned its decisions. Some even demanded that the board members resign. One by one, several leaders of the HOA stepped down from their positions. They realized that their greed had not only failed but had also destroyed their reputations. Instead of being remembered for improving the neighborhood, they were remembered for trying to steal something precious from a man who had every right to protect it. The regret of their actions stayed with them, a reminder that dishonesty never wins in the end. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his simple life. He did not celebrate with loud words or grand gestures. Instead, he found joy in the small things. He repaired a loose porch step, planted new flowers in the garden, and polished the old wooden banister inside the house. Each task reminded him that he was not only preserving wood and bricks but also honoring his ancestors who had built and cared for the home before him. The town leaders soon approached Marcus with a proposal. They suggested that his home be officially recognized as a protected landmark. This would ensure that no future association or developer could ever challenge its place again. Marcus agreed, knowing that the recognition would not only protect his family's legacy but also inspire future generations. A ceremony was held in front of the house one sunny afternoon. Town officials, neighbors, and school children gathered around. A small plaque was placed near the porch, engraved with the words, "A house of history standing strong for 150 years." Marcus stood quietly as the plaque was unveiled, his heart full of gratitude. He thought of his grandfather's words and whispered to himself, "I kept the promise." The moment was powerful. People clapped, cheered, and some even wiped away tears. They understood that the victory was bigger than one man or one house. It was a reminder that truth and heritage are stronger than greed. From that day forward, Marcus's home became a place of learning. Children visited with their teachers to hear stories about the past. Local historians came to study the architecture and the old oak beams. Visitors admired the garden and asked Marcus about the history of each corner of the house. Marcus welcomed them warmly, happy to share the story of resilience. At the same time, life slowly returned to normal. Marcus continued his work, cared for his home, and spent peaceful evenings on the porch. Yet something had changed inside him. The battle with the HOA had tested his strength, and now he knew with certainty that he was capable of standing firm against any challenge. He no longer carried worry about the future of the house. He knew it would stand safe for many years to come. As for the HOA, the regret of their failed plan never fully left them. Even after new members were elected, the memory of the case remained. It served as a lesson for all associations in the area. They learned that power must be used with fairness and respect, never with greed. Whenever new rules were discussed, someone would always mention Marcus's case, reminding everyone that history and truth must be honored. Seasons passed, and the house continued to stand proudly at the edge of town. In spring, flowers bloomed in the garden, filling the air with fragrance. In summer, the porch became a cool place to sit and watch the world go by. In autumn, golden leaves fell gently around the yard. And in winter, snow rested softly on the roof, making the house look like a picture from an old storybook. Marcus found comfort in these cycles of nature. They reminded him that life moves forward, but the roots of the past remain strong. Whenever he saw children laughing in his yard or neighbors stopping to admire the home, he felt a quiet satisfaction. His fight had been worth it. One evening, Marcus sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house glowed in the fading light, just as it had for generations. He thought about the struggles his ancestors had faced, the storms they had endured, and the victories they had won. He realized that he had become part of that same story. By protecting the house, he had added his own chapter to the legacy. The air was still, and the oak trees stood tall in the yard. Marcus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. A deep peace filled his heart. He knew that when the time came, he would pass the house on to the next generation with pride, along with the promise that had been given to him. The story of the house would live on, not only in the walls and beams but also in the hearts of the people who admired it. And the regret of those who had once tried to take it would serve as a lasting reminder that greed fades, but truth and history endure forever.